One message on my dad's phone changed everything I believed about my childhood. I always believed my childhood was normal, not perfect, not terrible, just normal. Family vacations, birthday parties, school events, the occasional argument here and there. My parents weren't overly affectionate, but they weren't cold either. They provided what I needed, reminded me to do my homework, pushed me toward college. Nothing seemed wrong. Nothing seemed off until the night I borrowed my dad's phone. It happened by accident, honestly, by pure coincidence. My phone battery had died, and I needed to quickly text my boss. Dad was asleep on the couch, snoring lightly, TV flashing random colors on his face. His phone was on the coffee table. I hesitated. He wasn't the type to like people touching his stuff, but I just needed 60 seconds. One text. So I took a breath, picked it up, and unlocked it with his fingerprint while he slept. The message app was open. That should have been my first warning. My dad never leaves apps open. He closes everything, every time. A weird habit, but one I'd noticed since childhood. My eyes weren't supposed to drift, but they did. Right at the top of the screen, a message thread labeled simply M. No last name, just an initial. A single letter that would destroy the version of my childhood I thought was real. I didn't open it intentionally. That's the truth. My thumb brushed the screen while I tried to pull up my contacts, and suddenly the conversation expanded. And there it was, the message that changed everything. He still doesn't know, and he never will. It's better this way. Sent from the mysterious M. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze. My entire body went cold. At first, I thought maybe they were talking about something else, something harmless, a surprise party, a business thing. Literally anything else. But then I scrolled just one line down. 1. Dad's reply read, "He can't find out he's not supposed to be ours. It would destroy him." My entire world tilted. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, like I was suffocating. What did that mean? Not supposed to be theirs. Who were they talking about? But deep down, I already knew. Some sick instinct inside me whispered the truth long before my brain accepted it. They were talking about me. I kept scrolling, hands shaking, vision blurring, stomach twisting into knots. Another message from M. "You promised we'd tell him when he turned 18. He's 24 now." Dad responded, "I changed my mind. He doesn't need to know where he came from. What matters is that he believes the family story." I felt something inside me crack, a physical sensation, like the ground beneath me had split open. Every memory I had, every moment of my childhood suddenly felt wrong, distorted, fake. And the more I scrolled, the worse it got. They talked about the agreement, about keeping everything secret, about protecting themselves, about avoiding another incident. Another what? Another child? Another lie? Another secret? My mind spun in every direction at once. Questions collided in my head, each one sharper than the last. Who were my real parents? What agreement? Why hide the truth from me? What were they so afraid I would find out? And who the hell was M? My ears rang so loudly, I barely heard my dad stir behind me. I locked the phone, set it back on the table, and stepped away like it was a bomb about to explode. Dad blinked awake, rubbing his eyes. "Everything okay?" he mumbled. I stared at him, this man I had called Dad my entire life, feeling something dark, heavy, and shattering settle in my chest. I forced the smile. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Everything's fine." It wasn't, because in the span of 60 seconds, a lifetime of trust had evaporated, and I knew one thing with absolute certainty. My entire childhood had been built on a lie, and I was going to find out why, no matter what it cost. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory of my childhood with new, twisted meaning. Every moment felt edited, like a movie with scenes cut out, dialogue rewritten, details blurred. I kept hearing that message echoing in my head. He can't find out he's not supposed to be ours. What did that even mean? Adoption? An affair? A kidnapping? My mind spiraled to places I didn't want to go. By morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to confront my parents. Not yet. If they'd spent decades lying to me, they'd lie again. I needed information first, so I started small. At breakfast, Mom was humming as she scrambled eggs. totally unaware that my world had been shattered hours earlier. Dad sat by the window, reading the news on his tablet like every morning. Nothing seemed different, but everything felt different. When Mom placed a plate in front of me, she smiled. "You're quiet today. Everything okay?" I studied her face, the face I had trusted my whole life, the face that apparently hid more secrets than I ever imagined. "I'm just tired," I said. My voice sounded normal, too normal. Dad didn't even look up, typical. But for the first time, I wondered, not with annoyance, but with suspicion, is he even my father? I wasn't ready for the answer, not yet. The first breadcrumb. I started my search with something simple, my birth certificate. I found it in the metal drawer where my mom kept all our documents, tax forms, passports, medical records. When I pulled it out, I expected to feel ridiculous, like I'd wasted my time. But the second I unfolded it, my stomach dropped. The hospital name was correct. The date was correct. My name was correct. But there were two things that weren't. First, the hand signatures for mother and father were different from every signature of theirs I'd ever seen. Not slightly different, completely different. Second, the birth certificate had been issued not on the day of my birth, but 4 months later. I swallowed hard. Why would a birth certificate be issued 4 months after the fact? I didn't have time to process it. Mom's footsteps approached down the hall. I slid the certificate back exactly where I found it, closed the drawer, and pretended to be looking for a stapler when she walked in. She didn't suspect anything, but I felt my pulse racing through my neck. The second breadcrumb. Later that day, I called my aunt, Dad's sister. She's the only person in the family who's not constantly performing for someone else. She's too blunt for secrets. "Aunt Karen?" I said, trying to sound casual. "Well, if it isn't my favorite nephew. What's up?" I hesitated. I didn't know how much to reveal, or whether she was in on it, so I started carefully. Do you remember when I was born?" I asked. She paused. "Of course I do," she said slowly. "Why?" "Just curious. Trying to piece together some family history." There was a long silence on her end. Finally, she said, "You were small, really small, and your parents were, well, let's just say they were under a lot of stress." "What kind of stress?" I asked. Another pause, longer this time. "That's something you should ask your mother," she said. Her voice tightened. I could tell she knew something. She just wasn't willing to be the one who said it. "I already asked her," I lied. "She said everything was normal." Aunt Karen snorted. An actual snort. Normal? Nothing about that year was normal. My heart skipped. What does that mean? She lowered her voice. "Look, all I can tell you is this. Your parents weren't supposed to have a baby. Not then, not like that. Something happened, and after that, everything changed between them. I felt dizzy." "What happened?" I pressed, but she shut down immediately. "I have to go," she said quickly. "Don't drag me into this. Talk to them." And she hung up. The pressure builds. By the time evening rolled around, I felt like I was living in a house full of ghosts, secrets in every corner, lies in every shadow. Dad came home from work and greeted me with the same neutral nod he always gave. Mom reheated leftovers and asked me about my day. Everything looked normal, sounded normal, but every word felt fake, rehearsed, like they were reading from a script. And I couldn't shake the feeling that they could sense something in me had changed. At one point, Dad glanced up from his plate and looked at me, really looked at me. "You're quiet," he said. "So are you," I replied. His jaw tightened. Mom blinked nervously between us. For a moment, the three of us just sat there in a thick, suffocating silence. Then Dad said something that chilled me more than any text message I had read. "Sometimes people go looking for answers they're better off not knowing." I froze. He knew. He knew I was digging. And that meant one thing. My time was running out.
I barely slept again. Every sound in the house made me jolt awake. The creak of the hallway floor, the hum of the fridge, the wind brushing against my window. I kept hearing Dad's words on a loop. People go looking for answers they're better off not knowing. He didn't say it like a warning. He said it like a threat. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. If my parents were hiding something this big, then someone outside the house had to know the truth. And the first person who came to mind wasn't a family member. It was Dr. Halpern, my childhood doctor, the man who'd seen me through every fever, every broken bone, every weird rash, the man who always treated my parents like they were made of glass, too fragile to crack. Maybe he knew why. Digging into the past. I called his office and pretended I needed copies of old medical records for a school application. 20 minutes later, I was holding a thin beige folder in my hands. But when I opened it, something was wrong immediately. Half of my early medical records were missing, ages 0 to 3. Completely gone. It didn't make sense. There were records from age 4, 5, 6, but nothing before that. No checkups, no immunization logs, nothing documenting that I'd even existed during my first 3 years of life. The receptionist shrugged. That's all we have on file. If the doctor signed off, then that's the full record. The full record? But it wasn't full. It wasn't even close. Something had been deleted. Someone had erased my beginning. That was when I knew I had to talk to him. The doctor slips. Dr. Halpern agreed to see me that afternoon. He looked older than I remembered. Deep lines around his eyes, hair thinning, shoulders a little more stooped. But the second he saw me, something else flashed across his face. Recognition mixed with dread. "Wow," he said, "you've grown." I sat across from him. "Yeah, 23 years will do that." He smiled politely, but it faded quickly. "What brings you in? Something wrong?" I took a breath. I found something, or rather, I found nothing. He stiffened. "I requested my childhood medical records, but everything from before age 4 is missing. Why?" He blinked a few times. "I'm sure there's a simple explanation." "Then explain it." He cleared his throat. "Well, sometimes files get lost. Old systems, you know, paper records don't always—" "Doctor," I interrupted softly, "please don't lie to me." His jaw tightened. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he leaned back and rubbed his temples. "You always were too smart for your own good," he muttered. My heart started pounding. "What does that mean?" He let out a slow breath. "I can't tell you everything. Patient confidentiality protects your parents as well." "Protects them from what?" I demanded. He looked away. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Finally, he said, "There were complications when you were brought to them." "Brought to them," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. He froze, realizing he'd slipped. He'd said brought, not born. His expression crumpled. "I've said too much." "No," I said sharply. "You can't stop there." "Brought from where? By who?" He shook his head firmly. "I can't. I shouldn't have even said that." I leaned forward. "My entire life feels like a lie. Please, I deserve to know the truth." His eyes softened. "Just a little. You do deserve the truth, but it shouldn't come from me." "Then who?" He hesitated. Then he whispered, "Ask your father about the night of December 17th. A cold shiver shot down my spine. What happened that night? But before he could answer, the nurse opened the door. "Doctor, your next appointment is here." He shot to his feet like he'd been saved from drowning. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "That's all I can say." He left the room without looking at me again. A date I was never supposed to hear. December 17th. I repeated it in my head on the drive home again and again until the numbers lost their meaning. The date wasn't on my birth certificate. It wasn't on any family documents I knew of. But the way the doctor said it, soft, heavy, almost afraid, told me everything. That date mattered, and not in a good way. When I got home, Mom was cooking again, like nothing in the world was crumbling. Dad was in the living room watching some news channel, his usual scowl in place. But the moment he glanced at me, I swear his eyes narrowed. He knew I had learned something. He could sense it. I decided not to confront him yet. Instead, I tested the waters. "Dad," I said casually, "what happened on December 17th? He froze. Not a subtle freeze. Not a tiny hesitation. His whole body went still, like someone had pressed pause on him. Mom's spatula clattered onto the stove. For a few seconds, the house was dead silent. Then Dad said, too calmly. "Why would you ask that?" I shrugged, heard the date somewhere, sounded familiar. His jaw clenched. Nothing happened, but his voice cracked on the last word. Mom turned her back to us, gripping the counter like she might collapse. That was when I realized they weren't just hiding something. They were terrified of me finding out.
That night, I couldn't focus on anything. Food, music, my phone, nothing. All I could think about was the way my dad froze when I said the date. December 17th, a date that turned both my parents into statues. A date that made a doctor break confidentiality. A date connected to a message on my father's phone that shattered everything I knew about my childhood. It felt like the walls of the house were closing in on me, squeezing the truth out of the shadows. I needed answers. And if my parents refused to talk, then I'd find another way. A voice from the past. It started with a memory, one I hadn't thought about since I was maybe 12. Back then, Dad had an old wooden lockbox he kept in his closet. I wasn't allowed to touch it. He'd always say, "Important documents, grown-up stuff." But once, while he was at work and Mom was in the garden, I sneaked a peek. Inside, I remembered seeing a photo of my parents looking exhausted and pale, a hospital bracelet, a torn envelope, a small tape recorder. The tape recorder stuck with me. At the time, I assumed it was something boring, like a business meeting or a grocery list. But now it felt like a smoking gun breaking into the past. I waited until my parents went to bed. Then I waited another hour. The house was silent, a suffocating silence, heavy and expectant, like it knew I was about to betray it. I crept into their room and opened the closet. The lockbox wasn't there. My heart dropped. But then I noticed something off. The bottom shoe rack wasn't sitting flush against the wall. I lifted it. There it was. Same scratches, same dented corner, same old lock. I carried it to my room and closed the door quietly. The lock wasn't complicated. Just a cheap latch with a tiny padlock. Dad probably never imagined I'd look for it again. I used a thin screwdriver, twisted gently, and the lock popped open with a click. My entire body went cold. This was a line I could never uncross. Inside were the same items from my childhood memory. But one thing was new, a folded piece of paper with the date December 17 written at the top. But I didn't open that yet, not when the old tape recorder was staring at me like a loaded weapon. I picked it up. I pressed play. Static crackled. Then a voice, my father's, shaky. Nothing like the man I knew. "It's done," a woman's voice responded, too soft to recognize. "Are you sure?" Dad's breath hitched on the recording. "We had no choice. They said they'd take him back." Take him back. Take him back. My room spun around me. Another voice. Not my father, not the soft woman, someone else. A man. Cold. Detached. "You made the right decision. From this point on, the record will show the child was yours from birth." My chest tightened so hard I couldn't breathe. The woman whispered, "Will he ever know?" Dad answered immediately, "No, he can't. If he finds out, everything will fall apart." I froze the tape there. My ears were ringing. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. The letter. There was still the folded paper. The one with the date at the top. I forced myself to open it. It wasn't a letter. It was a receipt. A document stamped by a hospital I had never heard of. Something about a transfer. No details, just signatures. 2 signatures were unmistakable. My father's and my mother's. Below them was another line. Child transferred on December 17th. Transferred. Not born, not adopted. Transferred. I didn't understand. My mind couldn't process it. Transferred from where? Transferred why? What did my parents do? What did that strange man on the recording mean by "The record will show the child was yours from birth"? And the worst question of all, who was I before they rewrote my life? Just then, I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, too heavy to be Mom. Dad's shadow passed under my door. My breath stopped. He paused right outside my room. I held the tape recorder behind my back and slid the letter under my pillow. Dad knew, somehow. He knew I had discovered something, and I knew, deep in my chest, that whatever happened next, I wasn't safe in this house anymore.
I didn't sleep that night, not even for a second. I kept replaying the recording in my head, my dad saying, "They said they'd take him back," as if I was an object, a possession, something they could lose or keep, depending on who they were. By sunrise, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront my parents yet, not until I had the full truth, not until every lie they'd buried was dug up and exposed to the light. So the second the sun rose, I did the riskiest thing I'd ever done. I drove to the hospital listed on the transfer document. The hospital with no records. The building looked old, too old to still be operating. Half the lights were out and the entrance smelled like disinfectant and dust. I walked up to the front desk holding the paper. Hi, I am looking for records from December 17th of 24 years ago. The receptionist glanced at the paper. Her eyes widened, subtly, but I caught it. Then she forced a smile so stiff it looked painful. Those records aren't available anymore. Why not? They were lost. Lost? I repeated, all of them from that day? She swallowed hard. Some days have missing files. Which days? I'm not allowed to say. Her fingers were shaking as she typed something on her keyboard. Not a normal kind of nervous, more like someone who knew exactly what I was walking into and wanted nothing to do with it. I leaned in. Listen, I'm not here to cause trouble. I just want answers. She hesitated, then whispered, barely audible, you need to talk to Dr. Halden. Who is that? He used to manage the neonatal ward. He retired years ago. But, she scribbled something on a sticky note. He'll understand. Show him this date. She pushed the note toward me with trembling hands. I didn't understand why she was scared. Not yet, but I would. The doctor who knew my name. I followed the address to a quiet suburban neighborhood, a small brick house with a garden out front. I knocked. An old man opened the door. Thin, gray-haired, sharp eyes that studied me instantly. I hadn't said a single word when he asked, "What took you so long?" My heart nearly stopped. You know who I am?" He sighed. "Yes, I've been expecting this day." He motioned for me to come inside. The house smelled like tea and old books. He sat down slowly, wincing like his bones resisted movement. "You found the transfer document. Did you listen to the tape?" My blood ran cold. "How do you know about that?" "Your parents weren't the only ones involved. Several families participated in the program." "Program?" I repeated. "What program?" He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "The hospital ran a confidential placement initiative. They called it a special guardianship protocol. It was supposed to protect children born into dangerous situations." I stared at him, confused. "What does that even mean?" He sighed heavily. "It means you weren't abandoned. You weren't unwanted. You weren't a mistake." He swallowed, emotion flickering in his eyes. "You were hidden." "Hidden from what?" I demanded. He shook his head. "I can't tell you that part. I wasn't given names, only orders." I clenched my fists. "So my parents were chosen, not randomly. They passed screenings, interviews, evaluations. They agreed to take you in under the condition they followed the rules." "What rules?" My voice broke. "Never reveal your origins. Never mention the transfer, never contact the original guardians, and above all, never let you search for where you came from." The room suddenly felt too hot, too small. "And they agreed to that?" I whispered. He nodded. "They believed they were protecting you. Whether they were right," he shook his head. "That's not for me to say." I felt sick. This wasn't adoption. This wasn't guardianship. This was some secret operation, some secret deal my parents had signed behind my back. Why now? Why tell me this after 24 years? His eyes softened. "Because you're old enough to survive the truth." He reached for a drawer and pulled out a thin envelope, yellowed with age. "This was meant for you, but your parents were instructed never to deliver it." My hands shook as I took it. On the front was a name I'd never seen before, but on the back, my heart stopped. There was a tiny footprint, my footprint. A chill ran through me so violently I nearly dropped the envelope. The doctor looked at me with something like pity. "Once you open that," he said quietly, "your life will never go back to what it was." I swallowed hard. "I need to know," I whispered, "all of it." And with trembling fingers, I began to open the envelope.
My hands shook so violently that I had to steady the envelope against my knee. The paper felt fragile, older than me, older than the lies, older than the life my parents had built around the truth. I slid the letter out, a single sheet of paper, folded carefully, deliberately, like someone knew this moment would come one day and wanted it to matter. At the top was a handwritten note to my son. "If you're reading this, they broke their promise." My heart stopped. I sat down because my legs suddenly couldn't hold me. The doctor stayed silent across the room, watching, waiting. I continued reading. "The letter from my true father. You were never meant to grow up without us. We fought for you. We begged for you. But the people involved decided it was safer if you disappeared." My stomach twisted. "Disappeared? Your mother. She wasn't supposed to be pregnant with you. Not in the world we lived in. Not in our situation. When they found out,
Everything spiraled. Threats were made. Choices were taken from us. My vision blurred. Who were these people? What situation? Why would a pregnancy be dangerous? I kept reading, gripping the paper so tightly it wrinkled. The night you were born. She held you only once. I held you for less than a minute. Then they took you away and told us we would never see you again. Tears hit the page before I realized I was crying. We tried to find you. We tried everything, but your trail was erased. Your records rewritten. Your birth replaced, just like the doctor said, just like my parents had agreed to. I wiped my face and continued. If you grew up believing your life was normal, then at least your mother's sacrifice meant something. She loved you more than anything. And she died without ever seeing you again. I stopped breathing. The room spun. The words blurred until I had to blink them back into focus. My biological mother, dead, gone my entire life. A stranger I would never meet. A woman who fought for me and lost. The final lines were written shakier, as if his hand was failing him. I don't know what name they gave you. I don't know the man you've become, but you were never unwanted, never abandoned, never loved. You were taken. And someday, I pray you'll find your way back to the truth. There was no signature, just the date, December 17th, the day they lost me. I lowered the letter slowly. My entire body felt hollow, like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left only echoes. The doctor's final warning. Dr. Halden watched me with tired, knowing eyes. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "I wish your parents had told you sooner. Or at all." I swallowed hard. "Are they in danger if I know the truth?" "No," he said gently. "The program dissolved decades ago. But the secrecy, the fear, it stayed with them. Why didn't they tell me?" He sighed. "Because they were afraid you'd leave them." I closed my eyes. That fear, that selfish, choking fear was the foundation of my entire childhood. Not love, not trust, not honesty, fear, the confrontation. When I got home, my parents were in the living room, waiting. Mom's eyes were red. Dad looked defeated. "You went through our things," he said quietly. "You lied to me for 24 years, so don't talk to me about privacy." Mom broke down first. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice trembling. "We wanted to protect you." "From what? From the truth? From the people who actually loved me?" Dad rose to his feet slowly. "They weren't safe. Your real parents were involved in something dangerous. We were told keeping you hidden was the only way to give you a normal life. You didn't give me a normal life." My voice cracked. "You gave me a life built on lies." They had no answer. Mom tried reaching for me, but I stepped back. I found the letter. My father, my biological father, spent years searching for me. My mother died never knowing where I was. Mom covered her mouth, sobbing. Dad stared at the floor. The silence in the room felt like a funeral. Finally, I said the only thing I knew was true. "I need time. I need space. I don't know who I am right now, and I can't figure that out in this house." Mom collapsed into Dad's arms. He held her, eyes wet, but refusing to fall. I walked to the door, reached for the handle, paused. Then I whispered the last words they heard before I left. "You weren't protecting me. You were protecting yourselves." And I stepped out. Where I am now. I moved out the same night, rented a small apartment, pinned the letter to my desk, listened to the recording again and again until my hand stopped shaking. I don't know yet where this path leads. I don't know who my real father is, where he is, or if he's still alive. But for the first time in my life, I'm walking towards the truth. Not the version my parents built, not the version they controlled, the real one. And no matter what I find, no matter how painful it is, I'm not afraid anymore. Because the worst part isn't discovering the truth. The worst part is living your whole life without it.